I think I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and for those who were in the room yesterday, just introduce our work as JASS or Just Associates. We are a movement building support organization, and we work largely with women and gender justice activists and their organizations in 3 different regions around the world: um, Southeast Asia, Southern Africa, and Central America, and are doing some light work in the US too. I think as a feminist movement building organization, our work has always orientated around a really explicit analysis of power and building power. And for us, it's that work that really centers narratives. Yeah. I think from a women's rights perspective or a feminist perspective, we know that women have been demonized over time, and history shows us that. And we also know that capital, as well as the other brother isms, right, like nationalism and racism, sexism, even homophobia, have really worked against those that, in terms of the mainstream, are seen as other. Yeah? And I think that our approach is really resting on the basis that institutions, ideology, socialization, right, are all about winning hearts and minds. And those ideas are deep. They're rooted in a value system. And it is those ideas that get hooked, right, or those beliefs that get hooked when we are thinking about the traction, right, of stories and narratives. And so I think if we look at where we are today, which is, where that slide sort of becomes important, we are seeing around the world the dismantling of democratic institutions. We're also seeing the rise of authoritarianism, and we're reminded about the different ways that people who are not recognized by a mainstream system are discounted or being controlled or repressed. And given all of this, for us, a close reading of power becomes really, really important in order to understand and identify actors, interests, and beliefs, and how it is that narratives are then being manipulated or used, right, to push certain ideas over others. So very, very briefly, on the slide, we identify 3 faces of power: visible power, which is largely the state; hidden power, which is largely about those forces, organizations, institutions, even people who are influencing, right? Who are influencing the state in different ways to push a very, very specific agenda. And then we have invisible power, which is really the norms, beliefs, values, ideologies that underpin how it is that we understand ourselves in the world and how it is that the world operates. For us, that is where the power of narratives lie, right? It's in that realm of invisible power where we feel, as part of a movement building strategy, we are needing to do the most amount of work to shift the norms and values that underpin policies and laws. So you can have the most amazing policies and laws. If change is not happening at that deep substructure, it's actually not going to have traction. And so to understand that is there, that discrimination and prejudice, that internalized oppression, lies, yeah, becomes really, really important as a step towards transformation and building collectives that can work towards change. And so the next slide, very, very quickly, speaks to what we call transformative power. And it is really here that the work of narratives, narrative change, and shifts lies for us as part of our movement building approach. Now, what does this mean? It means that we work in very, very careful and deliberate ways with communities, with organizations, with people at community level, right? To be able to really think through and unpick what I guess in big language you would call internalized oppression. Yeah. And for us, there are a number of phases of transformative power. It starts here, right? It starts with really acknowledging that I matter. Yeah. Power within. And not only that I matter, but that my life story counts, right? And I think we create safe spaces where that work happens. It's process work. It takes years and years and years. It's not linear. But I think power within leads you organically to working and naming power with, right? That I can stand with others, right? In order to do something, in order to act. Yeah. And I think once you move to that realm, you get closer to thinking about what is the common ground, what is the worldview. Does it matter if I am a lesbian and you are a sex worker? Does it matter if I am from a Zimbabwe and you are from a Honduras, right? How do we connect our stories in a way that allows for an analysis of the global, right, structure in order to be able to recognize that actually my struggle is the same as your struggle because we are living within the same system. I think that leads then to power two, right, which is the capacity to speak out, right, to question, to imagine, and to make choices. And often we find that this work, which is deep work, is work that happens in very intimate spaces. It's about building, I think, what you referenced, Thomas, community, right? Finding the common values, making the vision collectively, which takes me to powerful, right? That shared vision and our story for the future that we want to live in then, but also make now in terms of laying the path. I think as part of this, I'm not sure what the next slide is. It's going to be an interesting moment, but it's fine. It'll work. As part of this, then, you know, how it is that we craft or resurface our worldviews, how it is that we unpick the sets of structural oppressions that devalue us becomes really, really important day-to-day work as part of movement building. Yeah. And I think that this picture kind of encapsulates an aspect of it. This is from Malawi, where we work with HIV positive women who are largely rural based. And over a period of almost 8 years, we worked with religious leaders. I think this speaks to your point, right? Working across the divides, right? We worked with religious leaders, both Christian and Muslim, in order to, you know, come to an agreement around using the pulpit and the minbar for progressive interventions around HIV, including voluntary testing and counseling, et cetera, et cetera. And so this picture was a march to Parliament. And, you know, there you have the bishops and the reverends and the imams, you know, actually holding the banner, Women Crossing the Line, which is about transgression, right? And which is about women's agency and collective power and action, which for us was a very interesting visual. Now, I speak about the visual because I think it is as much about that as it is about the words, yeah, and how it is that we then tap into communities' indigenous knowledge systems, as we spoke about yesterday, cultural production as very, very powerful vehicles, right? To both put forward new narratives, live new narratives, be the narrative in the street, right, if necessary, as well as claim space and challenge, you know, the more conservative mainstream narratives that are contributing to further oppression and marginalization. So I have 1 minute. I think I'm going to end on the point that context matters, right? Context matters. What makes sense in, you know, Honduras, we can learn from, but may not necessarily translate, literally and figuratively, you know, in the Philippines or in Zimbabwe. And so context matters in doing narrative work. And narratives for us is and has always been a vital part of movement building. in terms of strategy, and in terms of supporting cross-issue and cross-geography and cross-movement alliances in seeing, imagining, and living into a different kind of.
Thank you, Shereen.
Thank you.